sounds like a story to me, some crazy fable that you would not believe.
Welcome to the Avram Davidson universe, where we listen to some of the greatest stories ever written, adored by Ursula Le Guin, Neil Gaiman, Leonard Nimoy, Ray Bradbury, and Stephen King. Enjoy classic tales such as Are All the Seas with Oysters, The Golem, Sources of the Nile, and many others.
Welcome to the Avram Davidson universe. This is a podcast devoted to Avram Davidson, who is just a prolific, innovative author, able to create community between different science fiction authors, bring in different elements of fantasy, science fiction, investigations, or detective stories. Yeah, super incredible. So Emma and I were very fortunate to be working with. This is Emma. Hi,
hey, Emma. Hey. Then this is Robert. Or would you like to go by Bobby?
Either one. Oh, I go by Bobby in this episode, so we'll call me Bobby in this one. Good point.
There we go.
There we go. We got that
little Easter egg for you.
A little Easter egg appropriate. Easter.
Yeah. Oh yeah. That too.
So yeah, thank you very much to Seth Davis, who is making this podcast. It's devoted to Avram, his godfather, and his mother, Grania Davis. And so Seth, who has, we established in the last episode, has all of these writings of Avram Davidson living up above him in the attic. And it's a treasure trove of Avram Davidson. So very exciting to work on this project. And Emma, who are we talking with today? What's going on today?
Well, I'd like to thank you, Bobby, for introducing me to my new friend, Zach, or ZB Wagman. He is an editor for the Deep Overstock Literary Journal and co-host of Deep Overstock Fiction podcast. And he'll tell you all about it in the episode, listeners. I'm also new to it all and super exciting and interesting. As is Zach himself, because when Zach is not writing or editing, he can be found behind the desk at the Beaverton City Library, where he finds much inspiration.
It's a wonderful library. And Zach is a library.
I don't know where it is.
Oh, Beaverton's right next to Portland. Pretty
great.
Much. It's a lot really rainy, lots of great trees. And Zach is just absolutely wonderful. So it's really nice to have Zach on this episode. I cannot say like how much he has helped me. How much we've worked together, and just I love working with Zach. I love speaking with Zach. So we asked Zach today to discuss a story called The Goobers. So we're going to be listening to The Goobers today, and it was originally published in Swank magazine, November 1965. So Emma, what do you think? Should we dive in?
I am so excited. Let's listen.
Me too. Let's get our Goober on. Let's go Goober.
Oh, Goober!
Go Goobers! All right, thank you, ZB Wagman, for coming to the Avram Davidson universe. I'm Robert, and we have
Emma. Welcome, listeners.
Another edition of the Avram Davidson universe, which is good fun. Now, ZB Wagman is a writer, an editor, a librarian, a publisher. You're doing it all, Zach. You're doing it all.
Yeah, and don't worry, listeners. This is also my first time meeting Zach. So this is exciting for pretty much everybody here.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Okay. We're going to dive into it.
I'm the one that doesn't know. I'm the one that doesn't know Zach.
So Zach, okay, we'll ask Zach some warm-up questions, I suppose. Yeah. Emma, what do you want to know about Zach?
I don't know. Maybe you can tell me too, but I want to know where do you know Zach from? What's Zach do? And specifically, what does Zach do that connects to stories?
Good question. So, as Bobby said, I do a lot that connects us to stories, but the main thing I know Bobby from is that we are both editors on the Deep Overstock Literary Journal, which means we publish a literary journal 4 times a year, which is huge and exciting. Yeah, it's super exciting. Deep Overstock is each journal of Deep Overstock is themed from a different literary device. Usually we pull these themes directly from Powell's City of Books here in Portland, where I am.
Woo, shout out. Bought some Avram hard copies there 2 weeks ago.
Oh my gosh.
I did.
They have everything.
So thank you.
Oh wait, I have a question. Okay, so Avram, where was Avram shelved? Is this the gold room or the blue room? This is very important. Powell's is divided up into rooms. Yes, okay.
Gold, all right.
Gold. And I had to drop it low to get it, but it was there.
Oh yeah, because the shelves go all the way up to the ceiling and all the way down to the floor.
Yes, it was magic for reals.
Cool.
Nice.
Yeah,
so for those
Powell's
listeners who don't know, the gold room is Powell's genre room. So sci-fi, fantasy, horror, mystery, all that fun stuff.
Westerns.
Really?
Oh yeah, Westerns is there.
I got some socks there.
Yeah, board games also. Let me say, I love the gold room for so many reasons.
The gold room was clearly the best room.
It's the best room, yeah.
It's also right next to the coffee shop.
So you smell coffee all the time.
Exactly. So we take each of our themes at Deep Overstock from one of Powell's categories. So like our most recent one was from the gold room, and we did it superheroes. We've done classics like Westerns, we've done dreams, we've done nautical lore. So each of those is a category at Powell's that we are then writing a whole journal on.
Here's an example.
That's awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
This is.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Yeah, so this is what comes out every time. I'm blocking our light so you can't see. So Deep Overstock is the name. And then basically just what Zach was saying is every time there's a theme that comes from one of the rooms. So if you go to the second floor, the whole room, there's 2 rooms. One is purple and one is red. So the whole room is red. And one of the categories is future. Yeah.
I see. And so listeners, on the top, it says very epically, deep. Next line, over. Next line, stock.
Oh, yeah.
On a red background. And on the bottom, it says future in a very, very futuristic font, might I add. Nice
That's
touch.
right.
With a rocket ship on the front, a little white and black rocket ship with a dog.
It's a mole, a little mole.
It's a mole.
A little mole.
Wow.
So each of our journals, each of our print copies, the color on the cover indicates which room from Powell's it came from. And then we get a different artist. We get art submissions as well for the cover as well as for the inside. So we choose one of our artists to be featured on the cover.
Oh man, that's awesome. And so what do you do for the journal there, Zach?
So I am one of the 2 primary fiction editors for our journal. So when we get all those submissions in, we accept submissions in mainly in fiction and poetry, although we also, as you can see on our website, accept submissions for just about everything else. I think we even
prescriptions.
We've gotten plays, we've gotten screenplays, we've gotten all sorts of images and comics. We've gotten, well, I think we haven't gotten one yet, but on our website, it says we accept ceramic pieces, and I'm waiting for the first one of those to come in.
Can I send you something?
Yes.
Please send us something.
And does it have to be a work of fiction?
No.
Because I'm not sure how I would spin a fictional ceramic project.
No. Again, we accept all sorts of things. So just submit a piece of ceramic and we will maybe feature it in the journal, especially if it matches the theme that we're coming up on.
So since we're recording this, we're recording it at a time where we're about to publish Bees. But when this is going to come out, we will decide soon. And it will be the... not the Pearl Room, it will be, I think, the Rose Room, which is the young adult, middle readers, picture books, and early readers section, which is
Are you freaking
super
kidding
fun.
me?
Yeah.
I
Fairy
know
tales.
exactly what I
Yeah.
want to send you. I know exactly what I want to send you.
Cool. Okay, that's perfect.
Oh my God.
Cannot
I've
wait.
written and illustrated 2 children's books.
Really?
Amazing.
Yeah, self-published them. I just printed a bunch of copies myself. But yeah, you would love it. This
Absolutely,
actually struck
yeah.
me a lot as a children's
The
story.
Goobers. The Goobers, you mean?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Very much
But
so.
we can get into that. I want to hear a little bit about the DO podcast too.
Yes. So I co-host with Mike Santiago a Deep Overstock Fiction podcast. It is an interview podcast, a little similar to this, but instead of having one author that we are reading all the stories from, we are reading stories from Deep Overstock's
archive,
backlog?
Kind of backlog.
Archive, yeah, from Deep
archive.
Overstock's archive. So basically what we do is either Mike or I host the episode. There's only one of us on each episode. And then we have a guest author from our writer pool who has published in Deep Overstock. We have this author choose not one of their own pieces that we have published, but a piece from a different author. And we discuss that other author's work.
I love that.
Yeah.
And then the goal is the next episode, we would have that author on to choose a new author and so forth. So each author gets a chance to hear their work discussed and then discuss someone else's work.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So for instance, like say if Zach was interviewing me, I would choose a piece. So like in this book, I'm holding up a piece right now called God's in His Heaven and All Orders Will Be Fulfilled, which is a great Amazon parody about the future by Walter Moon. So Zach and I would talk about that, and then Walter Moon would be on the next episode picking a story he likes from a different issue.
I really like that. It feels a little bit like a quest.
Yeah.
Yes. It's super fun
Perpetual
because
quest.
like I learn a lot about each author through discussing their pieces, but then when we have them on, we're not discussing their writing, but I get to know so much about what makes them tick as a reader. And then that like it very obviously sometimes, or sometimes very not obviously at all, influences their own writing.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to do it in reverse as well, where you sort of get shouted out into coming on. You don't kind of might not even be thinking at all about no one's like sitting there campaigning to have someone else discuss their writing, right? Like someone just chooses what they want to read.
Exactly.
And you can, as a host especially, be more objective and just give your impression, and then on the next one, and it's good for the listeners too, to be able to kind of make their own impression of a person as they're writing without meeting them, so to speak.
Exactly. It also gives our guests the freedom to really dive into what they want to read, right? They can choose from our entire backlog, anything that they want. And so they get to find that piece that really like excites them. And so when they're on, we're talking about something that they really engage with and really enjoy, rather than just it being like a publicity piece where they're talking about their own writing or anything like that, right? We get to really dive into stories and see what makes them tick.
Yeah, that's all. How can I listen?
You can find our podcast on anywhere you can find podcasts. It's the Deep Overstock Fiction podcast. You can also find us on our website at deepoverstock.com. Did I get that right, Bobby?
Deepoverstock.com. That's perfect. Good job. That's excellent. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. And before we're going to read the story, we're going to listen to the story, The Goobers by Avram Davidson in just a minute. But I wanted to say, like, for readers of Avram Davidson, Deep Overstock will really be fun, I think. We have lots of authors who are kind of after the same thing of Avram, like kind of making references to classic science fiction or just classic pieces, trying to engage in a community of fiction. Like we even have Jonathan Van Bell, who I'm pretty sure is just Avram Davidson reincarnated. Lots of authors that I think fans of Davidson would just love. So that's a big reason I thought Zach would be a great representative to bring people who love Avram to more authors similar to Avram. Yeah. So let's read The Goobers. Well, let's listen to The Goobers by Avram Davidson.
Let's go, Goobies.
Let's go, Goobies.
The Goobers. When I was a boy, I lived for a while after my folks both died with my grandfather, and he was one of the meanest, nastiest old men you'd ever want to know, only you wouldn't have wanted to have known him. He had a little old house that there was nothing in the least cute or quaint about, and it smelled of kerosene and bacon grease and moldy old walls and dirty clothes. He must have had one of the largest collections of tin cans filled up with bacon grease around there in those parts. I suppose he was afraid there might be a shortage of this vital commodity some day, and he was sure as hell going to be prepared for it. The dirty old kitchen had 2 stoves, one wood and one kerosene, and although the thicket out behind the house had enough dead brush and timber in it to heat the place for years, he was too damn lazy to swing an axe. Same thing with the clothes. Rather than pay a woman to do a laundry or perish forbid he should actually do it himself, he just let the clothes accumulate, and then he'd go through it and use the least dirty ones all over again. Finally, every so often it would get so bad that none of the other kids wanted to sit next to me. The teachers talked to the neighbors, and then one or the others of them who happened to have a gasoline-powered washing machine of the old-fashioned sort would come by with one of her kids in a wagon and a couple of bushel baskets. "I don't know how you let things get into such a condition, Mr. Harkness," she'd say, wrinkling up her nose and breathing through her mouth. "You load these things up and I'll wash 'em for you, for pity's sake, before they fester on you. You'll both wind up in the pest house before you know it. Mercy." And the old turd would hobble around trying to look debilitated when actually he was as limber as a black snake when he wanted to be, frowning and making motions at me to get busy and trot the clothes out, and all the while he'd be whining things like, "I sure do thank you, Miss Wallaby," or whatever in the hell her name was. "I don't know what we'd do without our neighbors, as the good book says. I'm just a poor, sick old man, and this boy is too much for me. It's not right I should have such a burden thrust upon me in the decline of my life. I haven't got the strength for it. No, I haven't, ma'am. He'll be the death of me, I predict, for he won't work and he won't listen, and he won't obey," and so on and so forth. Then once she was out of sight and hearing, he'd sit back in his easy chair that had the bottom sprung out of it, and he'd smirk and laugh and carry on about how he'd sure gotten the best of that deal, all right. Just sit and wait long enough and let the word get around, and sure enough, boy, some damn fool will turn up and do the work. Well, I'm willing. Let 'em. Good for their souls. And he'd cackle and hee-haw and dribble apple twist tobacco juice onto his dirty old mustache. He had no shame, and he had no pride. Send me begging for food. He'd do that, although he had money for the bootlegger. And he'd send me to steal, too. Don't tell me you don't want to, boy. It's the easiest thing there is. You got that big old hole in your overcoat pocket. All you got to do, boy, is just drop in a can of pork and beans or a box of sardines, let 'em fall into the lining, and then just walk out as easy as you please with your 2 hands in plain sight, boy, your 2 hands in plain sight. So don't tell me you don't want to, boy. You want to eat, don't you? He had it all figured out. It was a perfectly good sort of thing to steal from the A&P because the A&P was a monopoly. And it was a perfectly good thing to steal from Ah Kwong because Ah Kwong was a Chinaman. Live on a fish head and handful of rice a day, boy, and that's the reason us Americans can't compete with 'em. He talked this way all around town, and one day when I was shopping in the Elite grocery store, old Ah Kwong waved me over. I was so afraid I almost messed myself. I was sure old Ah Kwong was going to brain me with a hatchet, having caught on to me. But all he did was to hand me a package. "You give you grandfather," he said. I took it and all but ran. What was there inside of it but a bag of fish heads and a bag of rice? You think he was ashamed? "By grannies, boy," he said, running his tongue over his gummy old mouth. "We'll make chowder. Nothing makes a better chowder than fish heads. Rice is nice, too. Rice is a thing that settles mighty easy on the stomach." He claimed he'd been wounded in the Spanish and American War, but was cheated out of a pension by the politicians. He claimed he'd been to the Yukon for gold. He claimed he'd been a railroad engineer, and he claimed this and that and the other thing. But as I got older, I come to realize that they were all lies, just lies. He'd rather work hard at a lie than tell the easy truth. But I was a while in catching on to this. When I say it was mean, I mean he was mean. I don't mean he'd ever actually beat me. He wanted to, for sure. He'd almost tremble with eagerness to do it sometimes, pulling at his belt and yelling and swearing. But he was too afraid to, because even though I was only about 10 years old, I was mighty big for my age and getting bigger all the time. And I had all my teeth, too. He knew that in a few years I'd be big enough to take him on and stamp all over him. So he threatened, mean, nasty threats. Won't go to get an old man's medicine just because it's mizzling a few drops, he'd yelled, and meaning won't go pick up my booze when it's raining fit to drown kittens. I've had enough. Boy, hear me now. I've had enough. I'm turning you over to the authorities. The county can take care of you from now on. We'll see how you like it in the orphanage asylum from now on. Water mush 3 meals a day and the cat o' nine tails if you'll look down your nose at it. I'm going now. I'm going now, do you hear me? To tell him to come pick you up. He bundled himself up and skittered out, rain and all. Of course, he was just going to get his pint of moon, but I didn't know that. I spent that night moving from one hiding spot to another, my teeth chattering, and finally fell asleep under the bed. It was after the authorities started never coming that he began with other threats. Boy, I don't know what I'm going to do with you. Yes, I do know. I'm going to sell you. Boy, I'm going to sell you to the Goobers. Well, I didn't know if the Goobers lived in the next township or if they were the name of a foreign power. All I knew was they weren't good. If they'd have been good, my grandfather would sure never have mentioned them. Nobody ever heard him threaten to put me with some family which would dress me right and keep me clean and feed me decent, that's for sure. He'd even threatened once to feed me to the hogs. Not our hogs. We never kept hogs. It would have been too much of a work to slop them. But there were plenty of hogs kept in town, and everybody knew that hogs have been known to eat children, though of course not of my size and age, just babies. But I didn't know that then. What are Goobers? I asked after a little while. Maybe they could have been a kind of animal, I thought. But in a minute I realized, no, they couldn't. Animals couldn't buy anything. They had to be people. Maybe the Goobers was their name, like we were the Harknesses. You'll wish you never come to know, was his answer. He made his mean little eyes all small, then he opened them so wide that the whites showed all around and the red under lids. That's what you'll wish when I sell you to the Goobers, which I'll do by the ever-living Lord of heaven and earth. He never went to church or said a prayer, mind you, and he didn't finish, just sucked in his scabby lower lip and nodded at me. Maybe they were another kind of authorities, state maybe instead of county. Mr. Smith, chief goober of the state, and of course his helpers. Anyway, whatever it was they might want to buy me for, it couldn't be good. I knew that. But I wanted to know more, so I asked Rodney Sloat. He wasn't a friend of mine. I had no friends. But he was a non-enemy, at least, and he was known to read books. Rodney, is there any such a thing as Goobers? He nodded his head. They live in holes in the ground, he said. It must have been about 10 years ago that all of a sudden it came to me that what he must have been thinking of was, of course, gophers. And I spilled my coffee all over myself and scalded my legs. All that time it was a mystery what he had in mind, but right just then, when he told me they lived in holes in the ground, it never occurred to me that this was the thing he meant. They lived in holes in the ground. Oh, this was worse than anything ever imagined. The old dog saw how he'd gotten to me, and it was like the smell of blood. He'd never let up. It was do this, do that, don't you dast do this or that, or I'll sell you to the Goobers, sure as I'm alive. And I went about in fear of my life almost, because although he'd never said that the Goobers would kill me or even harm me, why, how did I know they wouldn't? They lived in holes in the ground, didn't they? The old man didn't have any friends any more than I had friends, but he had cronies, which was more than I had. One of them was a big, ruined old hulk of a man with a long, fat face all sunken in the middle and white stubble on it, but 2 little clumps of black eyebrow like curled-up caterpillars. And his name was Barlow Brook, never just Barlow, and never Brook or Mr. Brook. I broke a plate. Got the dropsy, said Barlow Brook. Grandfather went into his song and dance. Barlow Brook, the boy is a torment to me by day and by night. Take the hide off of him. I swear, boy, my patience is running out. There's a showdown coming, do you hear me, boy? It's coming to that. I won't whip you like Barlow Brooks says. No, I'm too soft-hearted for that. But I warn you, boy, and I call Barlow Brook to my witness. Unless you mend your ways and mighty quick, I will sell you to the Goobers. Barlow Brook hooked open the door of the cold, old, dusty wood stove with his foot and spit into it. George Wolfe used to talk about the Goobers. He reached himself a hunk of bread and one of our 600 cans of bacon grease and smeared it on with his fingers and gobbled at it. George Wolfe, said my grandfather. He was a bad one, bad as they come. He used to talk about the Goobers. Remember that girl at George Wolfe's? Sassy girl? Sassy as they come. You can't make me, he used to say. You ain't my father, he used to say. Ain't even married to my mother. Try to catch her, he would. Couldn't do it. Take care, he'd tell her. The Goobers will get hold of you one of these days. Breadcrumbs, greasy breadcrumbs coming out of his mouth, but I never missed a word, thick as he was speaking, about the sassy girl at George Wolfe's. Barlow Brook washed down his dinner from the smoky-looking bottle. Didn't wipe it or his mouth either. She says to him, there ain't no such thing as any Goobers. Goobers is peanuts, she says to him. George Wolfe, he told her, that's why they call 'em Goobers, he says. They look like that, only not so small, not near so small. Got wrinkled old shells on, dirty yellow-colored, even sometimes a couple of hairs. Watch out, Sassy. They'll get a hold of you. George Wolfe. Barlow Brook put his moldering shoes up to the kerosene stove. You here now, boy, said my grandfather, smirking at me. I swallowed. I asked what happened to the sassy girl at George Wolfe's. A quick secret look passed between those two evil old men. Something had happened to her, I knew that. I know it now. And I've got my own idea as to what. But then, when Barlow Brook said, came and got her, I had no idea, except for sure that the Goobers were the they. You can be sure that I did my best not to break any more plates. I fetched and I carried. When my grandfather said, come here, boy, I came a-running. But he was a bully, and there is no satisfying of bullies. He knew I was in mortal terror of being sold to the Goobers, and he never let up. There were hickory trees back in the thicket, and one day he sent me to get some nuts. I didn't mind at all, and I went quick, and I came back quick. There was a bad family by the name of Warbank lived outside of town, so bad that even my grandfather didn't want anything to do with them. They were meaner than he was, and they had a bunch of big yellow dogs meaner than they were. And when I got to the hickory trees with my bucket, there was Ding Warbank and Cut Warbank with their own buckets and their dogs. You get the hell out of here, said Ding. It ain't your thicket, I said. Get him, said Cut. The dogs came after me and I ran. One of them got hold of my pants and it came away in his teeth. Behind me, Cut called them back. We better not see you here again, yelled Ding. My grandfather took on fierce. No trashy Warbanks, he yelled, were going to tell him he couldn't have nuts from his own thicket. You go on back there, he ordered. Go on now. I didn't move. Go on, I tell you. Go on, go on, go on. You want me to sell you to the Goobers? Oh, I was afraid of that, all right. I was afraid of the Goobers. But I'd never really seen any, and I had seen those Warbanks' yellow dogs, felt their white shiny teeth pulling that bite out of my pants legs. And I wouldn't go. He yelled and he raged. Then all of a sudden he quit. All right, boy, he said. All right, then. I am through warning you. In 1 hour's time, as I live and as my name's Dade Harkness, in 1 hour's time I swear that I will sell you to the Goobers. Now get out of my sight. But don't you leave the yard. What he figured on, I guess, was that the Warbanks would be gone by then, and I'd rush out and get his old hickory nuts, and then he'd pardon me for the time being. I stumbled away. It's 4 o'clock, he yelled after me. They'll be here at 5. Don't bother packing. You won't need nothing. An hour like that I never want to pass again. I hid here and hid there till I was sweaty and dirty as never before. But I didn't trust any place. By and by, I got so thirsty that I had to come out and get to the pump. I could hear the old man muttering to himself. His warning about not leaving the yard didn't matter to me worth a poke of peas. Well, what could he have done to me for disobeying? Sell me to the Goobers? He was going to do that anyway, he said. Of course, he'd said it before, and he changed his mind before, too. I only knew one thing for sure, and that was that I couldn't stand any more of it. Anything was likely to be better. I'd never been to George Wolfe's place, but I knew where it was, and it wasn't all that far away, about a mile or so off, on the old dirt road along the creek. It was an ugly old shack. Never had a lick of paint on it, I guess, though I barely noted that any more than I did the broken windows or the roof falling in on one side and the weeds and underbrush choking up the front yard. If George Wolfe had been the original local acquaintance of the Goobers, the Goobers couldn't have lived too far away from his place. That was the way my thoughts were running, and I was running too, right into the woods and down the hill, and almost into the swamp that stopped me going further. "Goobers!" I yelled. "Goobers! You old Goobers, you hear me?" I screamed. There was nothing but the echo of my voice. It was darkish there and clammy, and it smelled bad, and I was hot and cold and sweaty. And I took a big breath and went on yelling again. "I don't care if he sells me. I don't care if you buy me. He isn't going to go on scaring me like this. You want to buy me? You just come on and do it." Something was buzzing when I stopped again. Maybe just a dragonfly. Something moved in the gray underbrush. Maybe just the wind. I could see a hole in the ground not far off. Maybe it was just a plain, ordinary hole. But I didn't wait to find out about any of this. I turned and ran and stumbled away. Where? Why, where but back to the old man's house? Back to the only sort of home I knew. I didn't know what was going to happen, but I knew it was going to happen there. It had to. I slowed down to a soft walk before I got to the yard. Probably he didn't even know I'd gone, didn't think I'd have dared to. And I could still hear him muttering to himself for a while. Then suddenly he stopped. So did I. Stopped breathing, I guess. The bell in the old church was striking, and while I'd missed the start, there was no need for me to count the chimes. It only struck the hours, so it had to be 5 o'clock. I darted a quick look at the vines hiding his chair from where I was standing. Chair, no, I couldn't see it, but I could see him, see his head anyway, for he'd gotten up, sort of, and had poked his face forward. It had gone the most horrible, ugly sort of putty color. His eyes had a glaze over them like cold fried eggs. I had to turn to see what he was looking at, though of course I knew. There were the Goobers, coming up the back path. They were under my height. There were 3 of them, and they had dirty, yellow-colored, wrinkled old shells on, with even a few hairs, and dirt was clinging to them. "Where, boy?" asked the first. "Here, boy," said the second. "You sell, boy?" asked the third. They walked up and squeezed my arms and felt my legs. They pulled on my nose and grabbed hold of my tongue. They spun me around and thumped me on the back. Then they quit. "No," said the first. "No good," said the second. "No buy, boy," said the third. They turned around and walked off. I watched them go, not even turning around when I heard my father. I watched them go, not even turning around when I heard my grandfather keel over and thump the porch floor. After that, of course, I made his life a living hell until I ran off 2 years later at the age of 12. And there wasn't a damn thing the old bastard could do about it.
Zach, what do you think? We've read lots of stories for Deep Overstock Fiction podcast, and I was thinking there was one favorite called The Barrel by Holly Day. Maybe we could talk about that in a little bit, but this story, The Goobers by Avram Davidson, published in 1965, reminded me of that story. And I feel like they were kind of going after a similar feel, Holly Day and Avram Davidson. But I wanted to ask, what do you think, in the way that Avram kind of describes this horrible grandfather, what is the best of the worst? Can you think of one example of like why this grandfather is so hateable?
I mean, the character of the grandfather is basically described to be the worst person ever, right?
Yeah,
I mean, he is abusive in all but physical, I guess. It's interesting because Avram very much like wrote an exception to like, he never hit me, even though he really wanted to. He's pulling out his belt to hit me. But at the same time, I think the abuse, the conversation around abuse has changed a lot in the time since this was written to now. So even though Avram wrote in a like, it was never physical abuse, it was very much mental and emotional abuse.
That's true.
There was physical abuse in the like, the kid was starving all the time. The kid like they never washed their clothes, right? So like, this is very much a story of child abuse from start to finish, with like no exception.
That's
wow.
Yeah.
I didn't even think of it like that, to be honest with you. This is very much just a pure comedy to me. This was like hilarious.
Yeah, it's a very funny story. It's very well written in that like it's a very funny story about something that's very tragic.
Yeah, I saw it almost as like fairy tale-esque. It was immediately just all this, it's this classic setup of all fairy tales, like Harry Potter, you know, both his parents die and he goes lives with this bully family member, and then he's just got his own little fun childhood 10-year-old magic that happens. I was immediately transported. It's a very, very fascinating
for the child. This is a like a fairy tale, right? Not in the like fun like let's go on a romp fairy tale, but more of the like fairy tale of like, if you don't do this, the gremlins will eat you, right? So the Goobers are his own personal fairy story with that like major threat that fairy stories usually come with. The
so
big bad wolf.
If there was anything specific, like what detail about the grandfather's gross, like he had this one detail to me, for example, which is that he had probably had the largest collection of tin cans filled with bacon grease.
Oh my god,
that's
so
all
gross.
I need to hear. Nail in the coffin.
It's so gross. Having known, I mean, I can't say I've known anyone exactly like the grandfather, but I've known people tangentially like this person. And for me, it's the lies. What's the line? It's something like he works so hard at he'd rather work hard at a lie than tell the easy truth. But I was a while in catching on this. That is it. And that, like, to me, that is the scummiest thing anyone can do.
Yeah.
And this grandfather just so embodies that, right? Like the whole concept of the Goobers is that. And not to like, I know we just listened to it, but like the ending of the Goobers is because of that, like he works hard at a lie. I can't help but wonder if the Goobers that we see at the end of this piece, are they fake? Like,
no.
I can't help but think that the grandfather had his friends dress up as Goobers and come and just do this whole thing, especially because the sale didn't happen, right? It's just to prove that threat to the kid that the Goobers exist and they'll come back for you.
I wondered the same thing, because he talks about having his cronies. His grandfather had his cronies, and there's the one guy who's always what's his name? He always has his first and last name. One more time.
Yeah, Barlow Brook.
Yeah.
Best character. Oh my god. So you want to talk about good characters? Barlow Brook is for me, as I was listening to him, the most interesting and visceral part of this entire story. Just like the eating the bread in bacon grease, and then like as he's talking, he's spitting it out. And he's not like, he takes a drink, he's just got food and drink all over him, and he doesn't care. He doesn't wipe it up. Yeah, except he, like, the way I picture him, he's like this big muscly man, and he's just like, it's just so gross.
It's breadcrumbs, greasy breadcrumbs. That's all I needed to hear. That's disgusting. I didn't listen to it. I read it like 6 times, and it was so, I can't imagine somebody's smacking in my ears like that. So did you like relate to any aspects of the character, the main character? Because it just seems so vivid and visceral to you.
Yeah, I mean, the main character is, as you were saying, like a kind of a classic child in a fairy story type thing, right? I definitely felt and empathized with the main character, but I can't say that like I necessarily like felt embodied by him or anything. It's a very interesting story because it's very much a story about something happening to a character, and the character doesn't have a lot of like impetus in the story. I think multiple times in the story, both because of the threat of the Goobers, but also earlier on when the grandfather's threatening to sell him to the government?
Sell him to the Goobers. Oh,
no. Earlier on, before the Goobers arrive, there's this threat of like, I'm going to call the social services. I'm going to give you to the orphanage.
Yeah.
Authorities.
The authorities, just general authorities.
Capital A authority.
Yeah. Okay, so both.
No, he explained this. Okay, I'm turning over to the authorities, which he defines as the county, the orphanage asylum.
Yes.
Water mush 3 meals a day and the cat o' nine tails if you look down your nose at it.
Yes. So both with that threat, when the grandfather like goes out into the rain, I mean, now we know to get his hooch, but the kid didn't know that at the time, right? Both in that moment and then when the threat of the Goobers finally is coming real, the only thing the kid can do is just hide. He hides everywhere. So most of the story, like the kid can't, like it's such a crippling fear, the kid can't take action. Like he can only hide under the bed. He doesn't, it's not like he even runs away. He just hides until, as part of this with the Goobers, he runs out into the swamp and starts just yelling into the swamp. And that's like, that is the most he can take a stand.
I found that a very empowering scene.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Primal therapy.
I mean, it was the first time we've seen him take any action about this overwhelming threat.
Right.
Yeah, you know, so the Goobers is really interesting. And this story almost in our narrator's relationship with the Goobers and believing, taking action, not taking action, hiding, it kind of feels like a coming of age story almost. Like as he gets older, he kind of gets to take it on a little bit more or
absolutely.
Yeah. So I was wondering, did you believe in the Goobers when you first heard about them? And there's one example I wanted to bring up when he brings it up to his friend. They're both like, I think 10 or 11 at this point. And he says, have you heard of the Goobers? My grandfather said he's going to sell me to the Goobers. And he says, oh yeah, they're the things that live underground. And our narrator says, wait a second, then it must be gophers. He must have confused Goobers with gophers. And then he starts to doubt kind of whether his grandfather was making them up or saying the truth. So what did you think in this?
For me, the biggest surprise of this whole story was that the Goobers showed up.
Yeah, that
was absolutely did not expect that.
Terrifying. Dude, I looked like a goober when the Goobers showed up.
Yeah,
I for sure goobered hard.
Yeah, absolutely, it was just a story that the grandfather was making up to tell the kid, right?
Yeah.
Did not exist. Absolutely not.
Yeah. No, that was the 1-2 punch right there.
Yeah.
really horrifying. There's like, I don't really find movies scary that often, but there's that one scene in Mulholland Drive, the David Lynch movie, where someone's narrating this awful dream and they say that this terrible thing's going to happen. They draw you in, they narrate. And then that horrible thing just kind of shows up outside of the wall. This, when we keep hearing about the Goobers and knowing that they're not real, and then they come into the backyard and they're like the dirt's clinging to them. So
well, it was one of those things, like we got such a thorough description of them from Barlow.
Oh yeah.
Like he described them to a T, but because that was coming from Barlow and not the grandfather, I was like, oh, this is just like the lackey playing along with the lie, right? I like 100% just dismissed it out of hand. And then they show up and they look exactly like that.
Yeah. And here's how I almost welcome the Goobers. I'm predisposed to like the Goobers because the grandfather and his crony are painted so disgustingly. Like it's such a low, like the Goobers are the heroes to the story of the story to me.
Yeah, they are. They are.
Like the Three Musketeers.
It's the Three Musketeers. And what do we make of this? Not only do they exist, but they actually are merchants of sorts. Yeah, and then they decide not to buy this child.
Oh.
Yes.
Why don't they buy the kid?
Well, and I think Avram's done something very interesting at the end of the story, having them show up, right? Like it could have been written as like the epitome of this horror story, right? Like the Goobers show up and take the kid and his life is awful. But right before the Goobers, we had that yelling in the swamp scene, right? Which we talked about being very empowering. And so instead, even though the Goobers show up, because the kid is already empowered, the Goobers aren't that horror. They aren't the big bad guys in the end. Fact, like they show up, they reject the kid, and then the last couple lines are right after that are like, I gave my grandfather hell for the 2 years after that till I ran away. Like,
yeah,
it's like the Goobers are part of that empowerment story. The horror gets taken out of them through that swamp scene.
Yeah, and maybe they didn't buy the kid. They said no to the kid because they were like, this kid's not afraid of us. I don't smell fear on this kid. Sorry, won't take it. Or
maybe they weren't real and he realized that at the time. He saw Barlow under one of those cowls and
oh my God. Or he takes after his grandfather and now he's just lying about everything.
Oh yeah.
I don't want that to be true.
I like the idea that he's no longer afraid of it. And it reminds me of kind of the tropes in early horror movies where there's a big debate about, do we show the monster? Do we not show the monster? What is scarier? And we build up in this story, the monster's awful. But it's from these two unreliable people, these kind of scumbags who are trying to scare this kid. But then finally we do see the Goobers and the kid is kind of already decided, like you said, through that screaming in the swamp, I'm not going to be afraid. No matter what I see, I'm not going to be afraid. Then he sees them, like you said, they don't smell fear on him. And then he like vocalizes that decision. So it's really clear, I gave my grandfather hell after all of the hell he gave me, and I'm no longer afraid of it at all. And then I think what's the last line? I turned and never looked back.
After that, of course, I made his life a living hell until I ran off 2 years later at the age of 12, and there wasn't a damned thing the old bastard could do about it.
Yes. Yeah.
I love him. Have you guys read Huckleberry Finn?
Yeah, a long time ago, yeah.
This gives me such Huck Finn vibes.
Yes. Well, so that is one of those things I wanted to say was this. I mean, we know that it was written in 67?
65.
65. I'm sorry. We know this was written in 65, and I do feel like stories nowadays don't feel like this, right? This story feels a lot like the grandfather in particular feels a lot to me like Tennessee Williams, like Big Daddy from Cat on a Hot Tin Roof, right? Like there's this energy, this like kind of masculine energy that writers in the past would infuse, especially dominant patriarchs with. And it's this like kind of a kind of abuse story, but it kind of just like they puff themselves up and what they say is what it is. And I think Avram and Tennessee Williams, obviously, they were really good at writing these characters, but also really, really good at showing the flaws and how this like massive patriarch affects the rest of the people in their life.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point, because I'm thinking on, I can't think of any like kind of disgusting patriarchs like this, like that sort of character from other Avram stories, but I am thinking of some that are like they're more in classical positions of power, like the Women from the Red Planet or something like that. I'm reading it now. I just got it at Powell's bookstore. It's one of Avram's stories, and I'm like almost embarrassed I can't think of the name of it, but it's just following these this army that's cast out into space in various space missions, and it's showing just how disgusting those captains are that have kind of had the same, it's the same energy and the same mentality, but in a more formal attire, so to speak.
Yeah. And I feel like our modern society does, I mean, obviously we still have major issues with the patriarchy, but the way that men and the way that like the leaders, quote unquote, these patriarchal figures acted was different 40, 60 years ago, I guess we're at now. And it's so like, it's this more like classical trapping of like, what I say is law, and not just law, what I say is truth, right? Which is why the grandfather could make up the Goobers.
Oh, yeah.
Because what he speaks is true, and everyone must listen to him. And through this story and through many others, we see the effects that that attitude has on everyone around them.
That's really cool. Sorry, I'm just saying, I wasn't thinking about it in a historical context at all. So this is a really interesting dimension to bring in conversation for me.
Yeah, I think my work at Deep Overstock kind of gives that perspective, because I am reading a lot of new writing, and we do get submissions from people, I guess worldwide now, but also from very different age ranges. But I do think most of the new writing that we're seeing does not have these characters really at all. But even when they try to write them, there's something not missing, but I just don't think our modern society can quite write these characters this way, because so much has changed historically and societally.
Yeah. Yes. I can kind of see that, not to just dig too deep into it, like it's almost a psychology thing, but I can kind of see that with just that now it's just so it's so in common knowledge, the consequences of that kind of behavior, that you can't do it without being conscientious. Everything is so carefully chosen. It's no longer a caricature in that way.
Exactly.
It can't be caricaturized because it's too real. It's too clearly fully fleshed out. There's a story behind it.
And
the bacon grease.
Maybe it's like we don't really care about the nuance of those characters so much anymore, because we know that like that is such a toxic attitude, right? So modern writers are less interested in like diving into what makes these terrible patriarchal men tick, right? Like we're more about trying to shift the needle the other direction and shift like society kind of away from that attitude.
Yeah.
I mean, there have been a million pieces written about those men, right? Who wants to read another one?
Yeah, I did love this one.
No.
I was like, throw this goober in the back. No, I didn't think.
Not who wants to read another one. Who wants to write another one?
Addressing the fact that I'm a female here, just not to speak on behalf of all females, but this guy was hilarious, and I loved when he got what was served to him at the end.
Absolutely, it's a really fun piece.
Yeah. What type of category, like how do you think it would fit in with the DO podcast? What edition of it?
Yeah, so we have submitted a horror episode, and I could see it fitting in there, but it doesn't read like a horror piece the whole time. Like the main character is so encased in his fear that I don't feel like the readers feel that fear, right? It's more like we feel the comedy of it more than the fear of the Goobers.
I think so,
I could
yeah.
totally see it. We did a fairy tales and fables episode, and I think it would fit really well in that.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Yeah, as you said, this is his personal fairy tale.
Yes.
That's a good point.
That's how I felt about it. It felt like, it just felt magical. Like I was transported into this kid's world.
Well,
just,
and
just a kid by himself playing all day, it just creates an imagination world, and then that's where I am.
And I think that that is really the key, is like the main character is a kid, and we're seeing this whole story come through a kid's perspective. And that is what fairy tales are, right? Hansel and Gretel, kids. Like the kids drive the fairy tales. And so in this case, it's the kid's personal fear of the Goobers that drive this story.
Since we talked about genre just now a little bit, fitting it in with the fairy tales, and it's the kid kind of being trapped in this fairy tale versus horror. There's another question that we always like to ask, just the goal to get an Avram story made into a show. That would be really cool. So we wanted to ask, like, if the Goobers were made into a short on Netflix or a series or into something to watch, who would you cast in these different roles, do you think? What genre would you kind of go after? I mean, what kind of tone would you go after? Where would you do the setting? What kind of style? What do you think?
Yeah, this is a very hard question, I feel like, for this story. Because I almost I've already spoken about the theater a little bit, and theater is a passion of mine, but I kind of feel like this story would not be done justice by a camera. I feel like it would be a phenomenal staged play, because stage plays are all about getting the audience in the room buying into the atmosphere being presented, right? And we can in theater you extend your belief as the audience members, so the audience can be buying into the grandfather's lies the whole time, as he's spinning them, as the kid is buying into them and believing them, and the theater, the whole world is just spoken sound, and that is exactly what's going on here, right? Grandfather tells a story, kid believes it. Actors tell a story, audience believes it. It's the same dynamic. So I think this would be a phenomenal play.
I'm literally getting goosebumps thinking about it. To be an audience member and to be that you can be 360 around your audience members with all just creating a weird foresty swampy vibe everywhere, and then at the end the Goobers can come down the aisles and they can oh my god, that is brilliant.
Right as the play's ending and everyone's about to go and the Goobers just show up, the lights don't come on, the Goobers are just wandering into the theater.
Oh my god.
You have Goobers wandering down, reaching for the children sitting on the aisles as they're screaming.
Goober theater.
Yeah, the Goober theater. I think they would be really fun and nice, though. I think they would play nice with the kids.
Oh yeah. I think they don't want to buy kids, right? They obviously know how to deal with kids.
As merchants. Yes.
Oh, they're on the way out of the theater. They're giving everybody free assessments of their children.
They're just pinching.
But they only deal in peanuts. So they're we'll give you 6 tons of these Planters peanuts for that little babe right there.
Oh, that one's not so good. 4.5 tons.
4.5 tons of Planters peanuts.
Deal. I love peanuts.
Okay. So we're gonna make it a play, I feel like. So we're gonna put this on,
Yeah,
We're going
yeah, I
Broadway.
think so. I think key, I mean, even Netflix, even if it's a series or a movie, but like the key is the grandfather. Because I do feel like the kid,
Yeah.
there's a lot of talented children actors out there.
Hmm.
And most people would just, I mean, not that any kid could do it, but I feel like just about any child actor could do this part pretty well. But I feel like the grandfather's key. I still gonna reach to my stage roots because I think Mark Rylance would do a great job. He's a little bit younger than like kind of what's described, but I think he could do this like kind of disgusting character so well. Or he would be a very good not Bertram, what's
Barlow.
Yeah.
He'd be a really good Barlow though. Also, he's got the muscles as well, so he would do that very well. You could have a character like you would need an older character actor to play the grandfather. Maybe Ian McKellen would do a great job, but I'll watch him in anything. I'll watch him read the phone book. You could also do what's his name? John
Goodman.
What's the guy from Fringe?
I don't know.
John Noble. John Noble. He is my favorite, like, favorite actor who plays older characters who are not fully connected with reality. He was also in Lord of the Rings. He played Denethor in Lord of the Rings. He's really good at connecting with these characters that are kind of removed from reality and just like so embodying that character's own reality.
Wow, what a niche.
I know, right?
I was thinking for the kid, did you guys see Belfast? Oh, it's great.
No.
So it came out last year. Belfast is a kid actor and that incredible actor. And I thought he's like really smart kid and also gets into a little bit of trouble, but can easily handle that trouble himself. You know, but he gets a little scared at times, but still handles it. He figures it out. So I thought the actor in Belfast would be really good for this kid.
This sounds very fun.
Yeah.
It sounds very fun. I'll be a goober.
Goober will be the best role to play.
I am so pumped. I really do think this would be a great short play. It could even be a short play for kids or something.
Yeah.
We could downplay the whole grandfather thing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It could either be like classic Tennessee Williams type, like big whole play, or it could be just like a very fun, like short children's fairy tale story.
Yeah.
I'm thinking under the St. John's Bridge, they used to do Trek in the Park where they would remake Star Trek episodes, but live theater. You do it under St. John's Bridge, a live theater production of the Goobers, and there's Goobers just wandering around in the park.
Oh, that'd be so cool.
Yeah.
It'd be so weird.
That'd be weird.
I feel like, so I think the difference is if it's a play, having the Goobers show up at the end would be very fun. But I feel like if it's a like short film series, whatever, maybe not a series, but if it was a film of some sort, maybe not having them show up, because it's all about building that tension. And then like you get the release of the yelling in the swamp, but then like you kind of do what the horror movies do, where you like get something moving in the swamp and then it just cuts to black.
You could do
that is so sadistic.
You could do a great marketing campaign like The Ring did when it first came out, you know, so everyone watches the movie. After you watch the movie, nothing happens, there are no Goobers, then you get a note in the mail signed the Goobers, and it's kind of dirty, and it's like, we'll be at your house. Yeah. So we got to make this happen. We're going to make the Goobers happen. So I think that's it for today. That's all we have time for. I want to very much thank ZB Wagman for coming onto the show and ask.
Yes,
Zach,
thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast.
So fun.
Super fun. We got a whole play out of it. Zach, is there anything that you want to plug while we're wrapping up?
I would say just head over to deepoverstock.com, take a look at our journal. You can also, I don't think I mentioned this at the top, you can read our journal fully online. We release it for free online. If you like what you see there, feel free to order an issue or two, or I think we're at 14 now. So yeah, just check us out.
Check out Deep Overstock, deepoverstock.com. There's dad hats, books, everything you could want on deepoverstock.com.
And check out the podcast at Deep Overstock Fiction Podcast.
Yeah, it's on Spotify. It's great. Subscribe if you have time.
Spotify, Apple Podcast, wherever you do it.
Goober Podcast. Goober Broadcasting. Anyway, from underground. If you live underground and you subscribe to Goober Podcast, you can find it there. Okay, thank you. Thank you, ZB Wagman. Thanks, Emma. And
thank you. Thank you, Robert.
See you next time.
I suppose God only knows. It sounds like a story to me, some crazy fable.